This is the sound of Samoan New Zealanders at Auckland's Pasifika Festival last weekend. There are more than 180,000 Samoans living here. Another 200,000 live in the USA and some 100,000 in Australia. That's 500,000 people. But the population of Samoa itself, about 220,000. Now, the Samoan government has passed new laws that would give many of these thousands overseas residents a vote in Samoan elections. And the government that passed the laws won the last election largely thanks to overseas support.
Samoa's electoral laws have been amended, giving citizens the right to register to vote from overseas. The amendments to Samoa's Electoral Amendment Bill 2024 was passed on Friday morning by Samoa's Parliament in Apia.
There were concerns the amendment would result in Samoa's diaspora influencing general elections, as the diaspora number outnumber the local population.
I think to allow overseas citizens, Samoans, to vote would be problematic. There is a large number of overseas Samoans that would most likely outnumber the number of Samoan citizens living in Samoa. So that's a major concern.
The whole idea to make sure we consider all avenues for any Samoa who is eligible to vote.
Talofa lava. I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, when you leave your country, should you also leave the decision-making to those who stayed? Overseas voting is hardly unusual. Kiwis overseas can vote, as can citizens from much of the rest of the world. But when your local population is smaller than the diaspora, is that really fair?
The opposition, however, is concerned that given the large size of the Samoan diaspora, that overseas voters, people that are registering from overseas but then coming into the country to vote, could outnumber local voters, meaning election results could be determined, the way they're phrasing it, by a population outside of Samoa as opposed to those that are residing in Samoa.
That's Karoi Hawkins from RNZ Pacific. He says the debate stems from the modernisation of the Samoan electoral rolls ahead of the election in 2026. A new roll will use biometrics and photographs. And now, citizens overseas will be eligible to vote and can even register online, as long as they come back for their biometrics to be taken.
My colleague Finau Fonua spoke with the Electoral Commissioner about the laws, and he says he says he feels a lot of the people commenting on this haven't actually read the laws and especially the parts around residency.
There are requirements under the law, qualifications for you to be registered. And the qualification is to be a Samoan citizen. You're 21 years and over. And thirdly, you have resided in Samoa.
So one of the things for you being eligible to vote is not only being a citizen of Samoa, but registering in one constituency where you reside. And so he's saying that sort of alleviates any of those concerns. But I had a look at the Act, and it does say if you are a Samoan citizen living overseas, the last place of residency that you had in Samoa is considered your residency for the purpose of registering to vote in the election. And the Commissioner also said that as long as you're in the country 6 months prior to the election, you could also be seen as a resident of Samoa. So there are some grey areas around who is eligible to vote in the sense that would worry people about the diaspora.
Finau Fonua says it also goes the other way. Some Samoans overseas are upset because there's a penalty for not voting if you're eligible.
The penalty is 100 tala.
Is that a lot of money?
That's probably 75 New Zealand dollars, so it's not hugely expensive, but it's a slap on the wrist. And yeah, so if you're Samoan living in New Zealand and you go back to visit your home country, you pay 100 tala for not voting, even if you have no interest in voting. And I've spoken to Samoan friends here who are eligible to vote, and a lot of them really don't care about politics in Samoa.
But if they go back, they will have to vote or register to vote, otherwise they'll get a fine.
According to this report, yes.
Right. What kind of impact do you think that will have?
Well, I guess Samoan government would make a lot of money from the Samoans going back, but it's not going to make them popular among the Samoan diaspora, which is ironic because one of the purposes behind the law change was to make the electoral system more inclusive for the Samoan diaspora.
Here's Karoy again.
So I guess it's like any other country in terms of if you're a citizen, it's your basic right to vote, right? Regardless of where you live in the world. The only difference being, I think some of the numbers that local media were putting up is for New Zealand alone, the number of eligible voters that are Samoan citizen was almost equal to the number that actually registered to vote in Samoa at the last election. So if you imagine that and then compared to the large communities in the US, in Australia, around the world, if you get a whole bunch of people that are actually eligible to vote and are Samoan citizens that could just come in for the election, then you might be looking at a picture where people could sway, I guess, the vote that don't actually live in Samoa. Where this comes into the politics is that the Fast Party, when it came into power in the last election...
Samoa's Court of Appeal has ruled the country has a new government more than 100 days after the election. It has ruled this evening the impromptu swearing in by the Fast Party in May is legitimate.
The Fast Party campaigned for a lot of its support, funding and likewise outside of the country. So it had a big support and following outside of Samoa. And so the question that we're asking is whether this would play into their hands in terms of that bigger support base offshore. And if the opposition HRPP party, which was in power for donkey's years under Tuilaipa.
Hi, welcome back. Yes, I am here with the man himself, Samoa's Prime Minister. How are you this morning?
I'm fine.
Has a stronger support base locally, whether that is where the political to and froing is coming from in terms of the concerns around this amendment.
So you do talk about the Samoan electoral system needing a bit of an overhaul. So what is the issue with the Samoan electoral system as it stands at the moment?
As I understand it, it is something that's been in place for donkey's years and is in need of an overhaul. In terms of specifics, the only thing that I've seen discussed in the back and forth on the repeal is that a lot of ghost voters remain on the roll. A lot of people that have passed away still sit on the roll. And part of the Amendment 1, which is to repeal the current electoral roll and re-register every eligible voter, is to get rid of that group of people that have already passed away but are still on the voters' roll. The other thing that they mentioned was that the biometrics, which is being brought in, is to limit any fraudulent practices in terms of people pretending to be someone else and voting in the election. So those are the only two issues that I've seen brought up and talked about, but I'm sure there's others pertaining to the legislation as well.
That biometric idea seems quite advanced. I mean, don't have to do that in New Zealand, do we? Yes,
it's something that's sort of been brought in. I've seen this in my own country in Solomon Islands. The whole idea being that, your photograph, your fingerprints, but it kind of backfired in Solomon Islands for some regional context, because what MPs there were doing was they were getting people to give them their biometric voter registration card so they could tally how many people were going to vote for them, and they'd give them back the cards just before the election with whatever promises that were made. So it almost gave the MPs in the Solomon Islands case a way to account and to even tally up their numbers before the actual election, having these biometric cards. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in Samoa.
Yeah, well, the thing is, as I understand it, even if you do live elsewhere around the world, you have to come back to Samoa to do the biometric recognition to actually be enrolled. Is that right?
Yes, definitely yes. So it is an expensive exercise. People struggle to get people involved in the electoral process nowadays with democracies in general. So there is a lot of expense involved in that, and also not everybody is invested in politics outside of Samoa as well. It'll be interesting to see whether there is a massive uptake of the broadening of the electoral rolls in the upcoming election in 2026, or whether it is just that a few people with still strong ties to land, businesses, family, that kind of thing, still becomes an issue. But one thing that our Samoan colleagues have raised also is that because of the huge remittances from the diaspora, Samoan diaspora back home, for church, for family, for all sorts of things, they do feel that they are contributing to the development of the country, to the ongoing business and economy of Samoa. I think you'll have to pull up the remittance figures, but it's quite a large revenue stream for Samoa in terms of foreign currency going into the country.
Like RSC workers, for instance, that work over in New Zealand.
Even before the RSC schemes became big, I think it was even just really strong familial ties to Samoan family. There's weddings, church celebrations, funerals. There's really, really strong tradition of supporting family in Samoa for Samoans.
And those people feel like they haven't been able to have a say.
Yes, because you cannot, well, technically they still haven't got a say, because you do have to travel to Samoa, as opposed to Fiji, for example, where they do set up polling stations around where there are communities overseas to be able to vote in the election. So it's a small percentage of the electoral vote in Fiji. Tonga, I understand, does not allow overseas voting, so that's all done in Kingdom. Solomon Islands the same. So it is the concept, I guess, of overseas voting is still pretty new for the Pacific. But in Samoa's case, this opening up of the online registration is a first. And so it'll be interesting to see whether that does translate to any massive skewing in the number of voters that register for the 2026 election, and if people who've been raising concerns will be justified in their views on what the impacts will be.
So just to clarify, you can only vote if you've been in Samoa in, say, the last 6 months, was that right? Or you have to have been living there under these new rules?
So the only two qualifiers in the Electoral Act that I've read is that you have to be over 21 and you have to be a Samoan citizen. When it comes to where you can register, that's where the residency comes in. So you can only register to vote in one constituency, and it has to be the constituency that either you reside in, or there's an exception for if you're a spouse of a candidate, you can register in their constituency, or if you are a matai with a title in another village or area that's different from where you reside in. There's a few exceptions, and one of them is for if you're a Samoan citizen living overseas, your place of residence is considered the last place that you resided in Samoa before leaving Samoa.
I see.
Yeah,
right.
so it is the case where if you are a citizen and you've left Samoa to work overseas, or even migrated to live overseas, you could still, according to the law, register based on where you used to live when you were in Samoa. So I think that's where that really opens up the numbers in terms of how many people have left Samoa that have lived there in the past, right? So that's where they would be looking at it. Because the Electoral Commissioner, when he spoke to my colleague, was saying that the residency requirements of the law should put to bed a lot of the worries about, let's say, a person of Samoan heritage who's never lived in Samoa registering to vote, for example, which would open up the numbers even more if that category of person was allowed to vote in the election.
What's the commentary been like in Samoa itself? Like, the reports, have they been supportive of this change? Have they been against this change?
Most of the official commentary we've seen has been in the parliament. So it's just been the debate that we were following last week. The government saying it's just a necessary part of modernising the voter registration system, and the opposition raising concerns about the timing, but also the impacts, if there will be any, of opening up the rule. So those are the official viewpoints.
But yeah, why is this such a big deal? I mean, why should we over here in New Zealand care about this?
I guess New Zealand has a very large Samoan diaspora, and it does. There are, as I said, really strong connections to the islands through family, through business arrangements, through churches, and politically, again, a lot of the fundraising for the current ruling party, Fast Party, was done overseas. So I think it is something to pay attention to, and it might be that there are Samoan citizens that were unable to even start the voter registration process before returning home, that this might make it easier for. We're not sure. We're yet to gauge that. But I just think, for Samoa, for New Zealand, for Australia, for the US, with large Samoan populations, I think it is something that is worth at least understanding and knowing what it's all about.
Well, the thing about it is this rule the law that's been in place previously could have left a lot of people disenfranchised because they can't vote in their home country, they're too new to New Zealand, they can't vote, so they can't really have their democratic voice.
Exactly, and the RSC grouping wasn't included in the exception previously either. So it was only, as I said, students from Samoa who were studying overseas and Samoans employed in diplomatic missions for the country that were allowed to register online. Wow. So this would actually enable that grouping as well, I understand, RSC workers to register to vote while they're here and then go back home just to do the biometrics and be able to vote in 2026. So definitely that group of people, I think, would have been affected by the previous law.
Yeah, all these people that they can't vote in New Zealand, they can't vote anywhere else, and they're not even allowed to vote at home. I guess it's a day you step off Samoan soil, you can't vote.
Yes, definitely. I think that would have been a concern.
Yeah, 100%. But so where are we at now, Karoi? Like, the law has passed, right? So that passed on, you tell me, Thursday, Friday?
Yes, passed on Friday, as I understand it. It passed last week, so I think it just has to be gazetted now, and then it'll come into force is the next step in the process for laws in Samoa.
Now that this has passed, I mean, there's obviously still some people that are pretty angry, right?
Yeah, so they are still adamant that the impacts of this could be that you have a larger registered voter base coming in from outside of Samoa for the elections than there are domestically. But how informed that view is, I guess, is the question, given the things we've talked about with what is actually still present in the Act as relates to who's eligible to vote and what constitutes a resident of Samoa for the purposes of completing that registration to vote in the election. So so that's the I guess for the Samoan, even the Samoan public in Samoa, I guess understanding and a more awareness about the laws and what they're saying and what the amendment actually does, I think would be the important thing for anyone on either side of this debate.
That's it for today. The Detail is funded through RNZ and NZ On Air. Wha whatai to our guests Karoi Hawkins and Whanau Whenua. Also to our engineer, Mark Chesterman, and producers Gwen McClure and Alexia Russell. I'm Tom Kitchen. Tō whā, soi fō.